Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Freak. Today, as we dive into Chapter 20 of Neal Shusterman's Thunderhead. My greatest challenge has always been to take care of every man, woman, and child on a personal level. To always be available. To continuously see to their needs, both physical and emotional. And yet to exist far enough in the background as to not step on their free will. I am the safety net that allows them to soar. This is the challenge I must rise to every day. It should be exhausting, but exhaustion is not a thing I am capable of feeling. I understand the concept, of course, but I do not experience it. This is a good thing, for exhaustion would hinder my ability to be omnipresent. I am most concerned for those to whom, by my own law, I cannot speak. The scythes, who have no one but each other, unsavories, who have either slipped temporarily from a far more noble life or have chosen a lifestyle of defiance. But although I am silent, this doesn't mean that I don't see or hear or feel profound empathy for their struggles due to the poor choices they make and the terrible things that they sometimes do. The Thunderhead. Chapter 20. In Hot Water. Highblade Xenocrates enjoyed his bath. In fact, the ornate Roman-style bathhouse had been built expressly for him. He made it clear, however, that it was a public facility. It was filled with many separate chambers where anyone could partake in the soothing mineral waters. Of course, his own personal bath chamber was off limits to the public. He could not abide the idea of stewing in the sweat of strangers. His bath was larger than the others, the size of a small swimming pool, decorated above and below the surface of the water with colorful mosaic tiles depicting the lives of the first scythes. The bath served two functions for the Highblade. First, it was a place of refuge, where he could commune with his deeper self in the scalding waters, which he kept at a temperature at the very limit of his ability to endure. Second, it was a place of business. He would invite over scythes and prominent men and women of the mid-American community to discuss matters of importance. Proposals would be entertained, deals would be made, and since most who joined him were not accustomed to the heat, it always put the Highblade at a distinct advantage. The year the Capybara was drawing to a close, and as the days of each year waned, the Highblade visited his bath more frequently. It was a way to cleanse himself of the old year and prepare for the new. And this year, there was so much to cleanse. Not so much his own acts, but the acts of others that clung to him like a reeking garment. All the unpleasant things that happened on his watch. Most of his tenure as Mid-American Highblade had been uneventful and somewhat tedious, but the last few years had more than made up for it in both mystery and misery and intrigue. It was his hope that calm, relaxed reflection would help put it all behind him and prepare him for the new challenges ahead. As was his custom, he was drinking a Moscow Mule. It had always been his drink of choice, a blend of vodka, ginger beer, and lime, named after the infamous city in the Trans-Siberian region where the last resistance riots took place. That was way back in the earlier mortal days, when the Thunderhead was first elevated to power, and the Scythedom accepted dominion over death. It was a symbolic drink for the Highblade, a meaningful one, both sweet and bitter, and substantially intoxicating in sufficient quantity. It always made him think of that glorious day when the riots were subdued and the world finally settled into its current peaceful state. More than 10,000 people were rendered deadish by the end of the Moscow resistance riots, but unlike Mortal Age riots, no lives were lost. All those killed were revived, and were returned to their loved ones. Of course, the Scythedom saw fit to glean the most offensive of the objectors, as well as those who objected to the gleaning of the objectors. After that, objections were few and far in between. Those were harder times, to be sure. Nowadays, anyone who rallied against the system was ignored with indifference by the Scythedom, and was embraced with understanding by the Thunderhead. Nowadays, to glean someone because of one's opinion, or even because of one's behavior, would be deemed a serious breach of the second Scythe commandment, because it would be bias. Scythe Curie was the last one to truly test the commandment over 100 years ago, by ridding the world of its last notorious political figures. It could have been considered a violation of the Second Amendment, but not a single Scythe leveled an accusation against her. Scythes had no love of politicians. Xenocrates was handed a second Moscow Mule by a bath attendant. He had yet to take a sip when the attendant said the oddest thing. "Have you sufficiently boiled yourself, your excellency, or has the heat this year not been enough for you?" The Highblade never much noticed the attendants who served him here. Their stealthy, unobtrusive nature typified their service. Rarely did anyone, much less a servant, speak to him with such disrespect. "Excuse me?" he said with a calculated dose of indignation, and turned to the attendant. It took a moment for the Highblade to recognize the young man. He wore no black robe, just the pale uniform of a bath worker. He looked no more intimidating than how he had when Xenocrates had first met him nearly 2 years before, when he was an innocent apprentice. There was nothing innocent about him anymore. Xenocrates did his best to hide his terror, but suspected it beamed through any pretense. "Are you here to end me, Rowan? If so, get it over with, as I abhor waiting." "It's tempting, Your Excellency, but try as I might, I couldn't find anything in your history that would earn you a permanent death. At worst, you deserve a spanking like they used to give naughty children in the mortal age." Xenocrates was offended by the insult, but more relieved that he was not about to die. "Then are you here to surrender to me and face judgment for your heinous acts?" "Not when there are still so many heinous acts left for me to do." Xenocrates took a sip of his drink, in the moment noticing the bitter over the sweet. "You won't escape from here, you know. There are blade guards everywhere." Rowan shrugged. "I got in. I'll get out. You forget I was trained by the best." And although Xenocrates wanted to scoff, he knew the boy was right. The late Scythe Faraday was one of the finest mentor when it came to the psychological subtleties of being a scythe, and the late Scythe Goddard was the best teacher when it came to the brutal realities of their calling. Taken together, it meant that whatever Rowan Damisch was here for, it was no trivial matter. Rowan knew he had taken a risk coming here, and knew that his self-confidence might just be his fatal flaw. But he also found the danger exhilarating. Xenocrates was a creature of habit, so after a little research, Rowan knew exactly where he would be nearly every evening during the month of lights. Even with a sizable Blade Guard present, slipping in as a bath attendant was easy. Rowan had learned early on that the men and women of the Blade Guard, while trained in physical protection and enforcement, did not suffer from an excess of brains, or for that matter, any skills of observation. It wasn't surprising. Until recently, the Blade Guard was more ornamental than functional, since scythes were rarely threatened. Mostly their job was to stand around in their pretty uniforms looking impressive. They were lost whenever they were given something substantial to do. All Rowan had to do was walk in dressed like an attendant, with an air of belonging, and the guards completely ignored him. Rowan looked around to make sure that they were unobserved. There were no guards within the High Blade's bath chamber. They were all in the corridor beyond, a closed door which meant their conversation would be nice and private. He sat at the edge of the bath, where the scent of eucalyptus in the steam was strong, and dipped a finger in the uncomfortably hot water. "You almost drowned in a pool not much bigger than this," Rowan said. "How kind of you to remind me," the High Blade responded. Then Rowan got down to business. "We have a couple of things to discuss. First, I'd like to make you an offer." Xenocrates actually laughed at him. "What makes you think I'd entertain any offer you wanted to make? We in the Scythedom don't negotiate with terrorists." Rowan grinned. "Come now, Your Excellency. There hasn't been a terrorist in hundreds of years. I'm just a janitor, cleaning filth from dark corners. Your antics are highly illegal. I know for a fact that you hate the New Order scythes as much as I do." "They must be handled with diplomacy," Xenocrates insisted. "They must be handled with action," Rowan countered. "And your many attempts to track me down have nothing to do with wanting to stop me. It's all about your embarrassment at the fact that you haven't been able to catch me." Xenocrates was silent for a moment, then he said in a voice dripping with disgust, "What is it you want?" "Very simple. I want you to stop searching for me and put all of your effort into finding out who is trying to kill Scythe Anastasia. In return, I'll stop my antics, at least in mid-America." Xenocrates let out a long, slow breath, clearly relieved that the request wasn't an impossible one. "If you must know, we've already pulled our best and only criminal investigator from your case and assigned him to finding Scythe Anastasia's and Kyrie's attack. Scythe Constantine? Yes, so rest assured we're doing everything we can. I do not want to lose 2 good scythes. Each of them is worth 10 of the ones you mop up with your janitorial services." "I'm glad to hear you say that." "I didn't," Xenocrates told him, "and I will flatly deny any accusation that I did." "Don't worry," Rowan said. "Like I said, you're not the enemy. Are we done here? Can I return to my bath in peace?" "One more thing," Rowan said. "I want to know who gleaned my father." Xenocrates turned to him. Beneath his disgust at being cornered like this, behind his indignation, was that a look of compassion? Rowan couldn't tell if it was real or feigned. Even with heavy robes removed, the man was still wrapped in so many opaque layers, it was hard to know if anything the High Blade said was sincere. "Yes, I heard about that. I'm sorry." "Are you?" "I would say it was a breach of the second commandment, because it shows a clear bias against you, but considering how the Scythedom feels about you, I don't think anyone will bring a charge against you, Scythe Brahms." "Did you say Scythe Brahms?" "Yes, an uninspired and unremarkable man. Perhaps he thought gleaning your father would gain him notoriety. If you ask me, it only makes him more pathetic." Rowan said nothing. Xenocrates had no idea how hard the news struck, as deep as any blade. Xenocrates regarded him for a moment, reading at least half of his mind. "I can see that you already intend to break your promise and end Brahms. At least have the courtesy to wait until the new year, and grant me some peace until the old-time holidays are over." Rowan was still so stunned by what the High Blade had told him, he couldn't open his mouth to speak. It would have been perfect time for Xenocrates to turn the tables on him when he was off balance like this, but instead the High Blade just said, "You'd best leave now." Finally, Rowan found his voice. "Why? So you can alert the guards the second I'm out of the room?" Xenocrates waved the thought away. "What would be the point? I'm sure they're no match for you. You'd slit their throats or carve up their hearts and send them all to the nearest revival center. Better that you slip out under their useless noses as easily as you slipped in, and spare us all the inconvenience." It seemed unlike the High Blade to give up and give in so easily, so Rowan prodded him to see if he could find out why. "It must burn you to be this close to capturing me and unable to do it," he said. "My frustration will be short-lived," Xenocrates told him. "You'll cease to be my problem soon enough." "Cease to be your problem? How?" But the High Blade had nothing further to say on the subject. Instead, he drowned his drink and handed Rowan the empty glass. "Drop this off at the bar on the way out, will you? And tell them to bring me another." And thus ends Chapter 20. Thank you all for watching. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Check out the links down below. Join the Discord. Follow the Twitter and Twitch. Let me know how you're enjoying the series. And as always, stay freaky, my friends.